What's up, everybody? Welcome to Hammerdown Motorsports. Today we are doing some more Super Duty stuff. We have the truck in the work bay and the light is on, so things are gonna happen. We are going to be taking things apart once again, and yes, the fun of removing the upper intake and lower intake on this truck because, oh yes, we've got the pusher system. So we got some stickers. I already got one up on the lift over there, and we got this all powder coated at pusher in the white, which I think is gonna look really clean under the hood of our Super Duty, being that we do have the star white paint on it. They give you genuine Ford gasket for our throttle body. We have silicone boots. We have everything beautifully powder coated. You see inside there, everything is nice and clean and wonderful, and will flow, hopefully, well, not hopefully, definitely a whole lot better than what we've got. So you can see how free-flowing this is into our heads. Then we go over to our truck, and we have the Ford intake manifold, and there is so much different directions that the air has to go in this factory intake manifold that just doesn't make any sense for our purposes. We want free flowing air. We want all the horsepower we can get out of our 6.7, even though these things are an absolute monster from the factory. We already have our Banks Ram Air, and that is working amazingly, and that is going to be compatible with our new pusher system as well. And not only is it going to make the truck perform better with our pusher system, it's also going to give us a whole lot more of an aesthetic under the hood. Let's be honest, the underhood of these are not the best looking, and now we can get rid of some plastic parts as well with our lower intake. So not only is our pusher system going to improve our intake, it's also going to improve our piping as well. We have this factory pipe. This is just a rubber piece there going into our throttle valve, and then we have this plastic piece here as well. So I know that sometimes these have been known to fail. I don't know if it's as much on the 20 and ups, but I know the earlier models did have some issues with that guy, so people have changed them. And then we're going to be changing this guy as well. So everything's going to be nice and uniform and clean looking under the hood of our 6.7, and I'm very excited to see how this all turns out. So first up in our operation, we are going to be removing this vacuum hose. We just push down on the black. Push and pull. You can hear our vacuum release. We'll pop that guy off of our coolant line in 2 locations, and we'll get down to the other side of it, carefully remove that guy as well, like so. Pops out of there, and we'll set this aside. And then we have our coolant hoses that go up over top here. We're gonna get this guy right here, carefully get under there. And then we're going over to this one that goes onto our lower intake. Just kind of rock it side to side. And then we have this guy here in the front. Just carefully get underneath there. Give it a little twisty wiggle. This is not the greatest trim tool. I probably should invest in a better one, but it should do the job for us today. There we go. As you can see, our little Christmas tree still survives. And then all of this, once we pop it out of this guy right there, is able to move out of the way so we can get our intake out when we need to. And then on our Banks intake, we got 8 millimeters. Back off our clamps. Off our lower intake. Kind of slide that off of the tube, set this aside. Now my thought is, do I need to remove this? Well, not at this moment. I'm gonna leave it on here, and if we have to remove it later, we will, but I think for right now, it seems to be pretty much out of our way. So next up, we have this wire right here going to this sensor, which is gonna go underneath our lower intake opening. And then you can see down here, I already have the red tab pulled back, and we can just get that guy removed. Might need 2 hands for this. Get her just so. comes off pretty easily. And there it is. And we're gonna route that guy, get it out of its retainer. And out of the way like so. Next up, we have 4 8mm, 2 up here, 2 down here. Get those carefully removed. This guy can come out of here, just like so. Next up, we got the charge air pipe. It's gonna get this little wire retainer there. And just like that. Then we have this little clip right here. Give that a little wiggle. Get our wiring out of the way. Then we have this clip right here. Pretty light, pretty easy to manipulate. My end is right on the top, so it's easy to get at. Pop that guy out of the way nice and carefully, not to damage it. Give this a little pull, and we're gonna be saving this. It's going on to our new system. Just kind of carefully get that out of the way, and we'll put this over on the bench. Then you can see down in there, I have my 7mm on our clamp. Just gonna back that guy off. And then we can get this charge air pipe out of here. And being that my truck only has 12,000 miles on it, it came off without a struggle. Let's go look on the bench and see how much oil we have in here. Things don't look too terrible. A little bit of anti-rust in there, but nothing crazy. And now, since this is removed, I think all we really need is this guy right here to go onto our new pusher pipe. So next up, we're gonna get our throttle valve out of here. Reach our hand, get our red tab back. This one's a little tricky to get your hand down in there, but get a hold of that connector. Just gonna set that aside for now. Then we're gonna get our 8mm, and we're gonna break these free. Run these out so we know they're loose. Then we'll hold our whole assembly together, make sure we retain our gasket, and get this guy out of the way. Now we have this 7mm right here for our hot side. Loosen that guy off. And let's see. Get the light out of there. I'm gonna see if I can struggle with this guy. It only has 12,000 miles, so it should be stuck on there too badly. It might have to break the seal on it, honestly. Get this guy in here. What I do is I just get the pick in and just push down and just kind of bring it up to the other side. Pick in there. Just kind of slide down. That's usually what I do for a radiator hose or anything like that. Just enough to break that seal. And that is up out of the way. Now we can go after our last clip for this pipe. Get a couple of screwdrivers in here so we can pop this guy out of its groove. So, give it a little wiggle. And just a little twist, and out she comes. And if you guys are wondering, I am using a 1/4-inch drive Wobble socket. These are actually from Gearwrench, the cheap ones I found on Amazon. And I don't do this kind of stuff every day. This is just more for the video purposes, and figured I didn't want to spend crazy money on these, but obviously if this was a daily occurrence, I would buy the good ones. But these are doing pretty well for our purposes so far. And then next up, we are going to go for this cover over here, top of our upper intake, and I am using a 8mm. This is an Icon, and it's got a little drop down there, and it's reversible, so it allows us to get underneath the cowl, give us lots of leverage, and get that upper plate removed. It's nice having the long wrench, because I can be pretty far back. I'm not reaching like crazy. Careful, not to drop it. Get that out of the way. And this one here, a little easier to get at. Break it free. Get that whole plate out of the way. Now we got a locking tab top. Give it a squeeze. Sensor is released. And I have a zip tie here because I think the last time we had this thing apart, that broke. So we'll get some snips, get that guy off. Which seems to be how that goes when these come apart. That little Christmas tree likes to break. So, get our zip tie off. This wire out of the way. Now what I'm going to do is, on our little locking tab, I'm going to put a eye. Just like that, so we know this is the right plug that's going to go to the top of the intake. And this one here, which is coming out next, pop our tab back, a little squeeze, because these are the same connector, we just don't want to mix them up. It's kind of easy to tell if you do have that tether, which mine is gone. That's why I'm writing this down on here. But this wire is longer to reach over here than this one, so just don't want to mix those up. And then we have another little tether down here. Pop that guy up. Kind of move our wiring over here to the side. All right, so I got in with a little screwdriver here, a little long screwdriver. There's one more tether you want to get up here on this stud. Get that guy up and off. Just a little tight back there. Get her out of the way. And then we're going to loosen this nut right here. And we're going to be able to move this guy out of our way so we can get this side of our intake bolts removed for our upper. So back in here, once you get your wiring out of the way and that back stud, you got to get that 10mm nut loosened up. And what I'm using here is my 1/4-inch Easy Red. It's like a very low profile ratchet and a deep socket because I don't have semi-deeps. But if you have semi-deeps, that's going to be a lot easier. So semi-deeps are on the Christmas list currently. But this will get us by for today. We're just going to back this off. Doesn't have to be completely backed off. We're just going to get it loose enough so we can get this sensor out of our way, so we can get our back bolts out for our intake. And that's a better look at the operation that we got going on in there. These are fairly inexpensive. I got these on Amazon, and they're very handy in tight spaces. And the reason we do that is so we can just push up on the sensor and get it out of the way so we can get a tool in there to get those back two bolts for this upper intake. And we're gonna get onto the one closest to the driver's side in the front. Break it free. Turn that guy up. Now I've got my deep 10 on the one with a stud and a wobble. Run that guy up. Now for our driver's side rear, I've got our Easy Red in there again and a deep 1/4-inch 8mm socket. You can get in there pretty easily. Not as quick as a long reach ratchet. The electric ratchets are super handy, and also another one for my Christmas list. If you guys have watched A-Rod's video when he does this, he whips through it pretty quickly, and I probably should have bought some more tools before I started this one again. Even though I've done this before, sometimes you just don't learn your lesson. You're like, oh yeah, I'll order the stuff I need, and then you forget about it, and then you're like, oh yeah, I should have ordered that. That would be me right now. I mean, I do have the wobbles now, which actually the last time I had this job, did this job, I didn't have these either, and I ordered them, but they didn't come in time, and I just used what I had in my toolbox and made do. But you can do it without them. You just gotta be a little creative. And now with a short extension and my Easy Red and my wobble, I'm able to get on our rear passenger one. It's kind of at a little angle underneath our sensor there that we moved up. Got a nice hand broken free. You can just get in here and spin it the rest of the way up, or not. Or continue on with my socket one little bit at a time until I buy a long reach, which I'm going to be doing now. Now back over to the driver's side. I made this guy pop up a little bit already with our PTT screwdriver. And then we do have the S&S disaster prevention kit. So we're gonna squeeze on our blue tabs. Pull that guy back, a little bit of leakage, so make sure you have some rags down there to catch it. And just push these tabs together a little bit. Wiggle this guy forward to the unlock position. And give it a little pull back. A little bit of fuel dumpage there. Get all of our lines off. Doing this one-handedly. And we're gonna turn. Let's try to plug these lines off with our fingers. Fun times. And up and out she comes. And there we go, our fuel filter is removed, and we don't have a big puddle of diesel there because we were able to catch most of that with our rags. And if you see here, we will not be replacing this filter. We will not be reusing this filter, rather replacing it with our fleece setup here. So we do have the upper and the lower. And for today's video, we're probably just gonna be tackling the upper, which allows us to actually replace that entire filter, see, like that, with this, which is gonna allow us to do a spin-on filter. Just like that. So we have a high quality Donaldson filter. They even give us a spare one, which is awesome. And then we are able to get this guy installed on the truck and not have to worry about factory fuel filters any longer. And if you're wondering, where's the other port? It's right there. So we can add that guy on. I believe that's so it's a universal fit for some of the other models of truck, but we will be adding this guy on there, and then everything will click in just like factory. And I believe everything fits exactly the way this filter does. It's a complete just bolt on, not bolt on, but click in your fittings and you're good to go. So next up, we're gonna remove the hardware for our dipstick tube. That guy out of there. Then we can lift up our dipstick, just like so. Get that out of our way. And break free our 8mm here on the rear closest to the driver's side. Send that guy off. Try not to pinch or lose our socket. That passenger side rear one broken free. Spin it the last few threads out by hand. Make sure that is nice and free. And now we can get our front two
on our driver's side. Then one with the stud is a 12 millimeter. Break that guy free. Like that. Driver's side front. Make sure everybody is all the way out, but still remaining in the holes. Now we have one more right here. And then two more on our lower intake on this side. Pull those guys out. This guy as well, not forgetting the washer. And lastly, we've got our 7 millimeter wobble down there on our lower intake to our turbo. Loosen that clamp up so we can get it all out as one nice package. And now our intake is completely loosened off. We're gonna get this fuel cup out of our way so we can make the twist to get it out from underneath the cowl. Now that we're all loosened up, we have nothing that's going to fall into our intakes. That is the most nerve-wracking part about this job. And also, we do have, from Urban 3D, these plugs that are going to go into the top of our heads. Keep everything nice and secure so we don't have to worry about anything falling down in there while we're doing our intake installation. So now, I'm going to grab everybody together. We're all gonna get along. We're all gonna be happy. Carefully taking the upper out, but we could have taken them together. I just wanted this thing out of the way. And now we'll grab our lower, and we'll grab the piece that stuck to the turbo. Like so, and making sure our surface is nice and clean. There's nothing on here. It's going to fall in. We will plug off our upper intake holes, securing that nothing is going to fall down and ruin my day. Probably more than my day. Most nerve-wracking part about this job is having those open for me. And there it is, our disassembly is complete, and we have our plugs in nicely. There is a lot of rust down there. That is really common on these. It's just how it is, it's bare metal. So I think what I might actually do is just plug off our ports on our turbo and get some anti-rust stuff or some rust converter and spray that down in there just because it bothers me. It doesn't really affect anything, but it's just one of those things. So for our silicone spray, I grabbed this DuPont stuff off of Amazon. I've never used this before. I was trying to find the 3M, but this is what they had. So I grabbed 3 cans of that just for future use and whatnot. I am going to be a little bit careful with that because if I can get the boot on without it, I'm going to try to, because then they're not going to slide around when you tighten up the clamps. That's just kind of something that I feel is important, especially with this guy. I ended up getting it on to this piece right here without putting any spray on it at all. So when I tighten this down, it's going to have a good grip. We shouldn't have any issues, hopefully. And then we already got one of our elbows missing from there because we have it over here on our turbo. And that actually went on really easy too. I haven't tightened it down yet, but I just got it kind of in the upright position so your angle is coming up for our lower intake piece. Then we're going to grab our lower intake piece. You can see right there, there's those 2 bosses from the factory are going to line up with our bracket right there. So we're going to get everything into place, make sure that those bolt holes line up, and then there is supplied bolts that come in the kit. So we got our bolts right here, the washers. Just kind of give it a little wiggle. Started a few threads. I'll get our other one right there. And today we're using our Also Tools 3/8 flex head ratchet and extension with a wobble. Well, kind of wobble extension. Worked really, really nicely. Good, got them snug down, and that should give us our proper clocking for how this is supposed to be. Now that that's tight, Make sure that we're nice and snug up against our turbo, and we can align our clamps. All right, so quick tip on this guy. I actually ended up pulling those bolts back out because I could see that there was a tiny little gap here at the turbo, and you want your boot to meet up right with that flange. So what I did was I pulled it back out and actually moved the boot down a little bit further towards the turbo, and then I put that on and then tightened up that clamp on the turbo itself, because you do have to push down slightly to get those bolts to start. And if you don't tighten that clamp, it's just gonna pull that boot down, and then it's not gonna be in the right position. And it's really hard to move this if you don't have silicone spray on it, but I don't feel that you needed it for this one. So yeah, if you do it that way, just tighten up that clamp before you put those bolts in. Then you can tighten this clamp last. Everything is tight there now. These two bolts, those two clamps. This guy is where it needs to be. And now we can just do our CCV connection and move on to the next step. So here we have our intakes side by side, our factory one. You can see how the EGR is right there, and then your throttle valve is right here. And then on the pusher, they actually move it over here. So when you reinstall that pipe, it's gonna go 180 degrees. So it goes over here instead of right directly there. And the design on this one, there is like this big stopper right here. So it has that airflow go around it, so it's a very big restriction. And then basically, from what I understand, it has to go down and up this horn in order to go into your intakes, and this one is just going to allow it to free flow right over there, so you're not going to have nearly the restriction. And they said it's like 60% or 66% more flow, which is going to be very nice, especially when you're running a turbocharged diesel. So on our new intakes, I did put the O-rings on already. You can see those are nice heavy duty fit O-rings that go right in there and have protrusion, so we get a nice seal. And our factory ones they're similar, but you can see they're not nearly as stout as the ones that come with the pusher. So what we're gonna have to switch over now is our map sensor. So we're gonna pull that 7mm, and then it does come with a new O-ring for it. That's a little more heavy duty. So we're gonna swap that guy over and get it into our new manifold. And she's got a little soot on it, so we're gonna clean that off as well. Grab a nice clean rag. Make sure that that hole has nice opening there, it's not all clogged up. I mean, obviously our truck is low mileage, but there was that much soot on that sensor. So we're gonna pop off our factory O-ring and put on our one from pusher. Get our pick underneath. That guy removed. And then we have our new one. Slip that over top. Give it a couple turns, make sure it's not twisted or anything like that. And there it sits. All right, so we have our map sensor in, and I had a little trouble because I was trying to find the bolt that it's supposed to come with for that. And whether it rolled away on me or what, I really don't know. But I was very careful. Everything was all laid out here on this blanket, and I have every other bolt except for that one. So there's supposed to be an Allen bolt that goes in here, and I had to use one of my own bolts, which is lucky that I keep stuff like that around because I had one that was the right thread. I had to do a little bit of shortening and whatnot to make it work, and I got a stainless washer on it. Everything is nice and tight, and it's gonna work just fine. It's just, yeah, it took a little extra time because I couldn't find that bolt. So maybe I got shorted, maybe I lost it. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, it wasn't here and I had to make it work. So now we're ready to put on our upper intake. We're just gonna take our plugs out of our intake ports on our heads, and make sure you don't have any tools or anything above that, because if something were to fall down in there, very, very bad time. Don't want that to happen, and you don't want to forget to take out our plugs, obviously, or it's not gonna flow well at all. So we're gonna get those out, and we're gonna bring over our intake, set that in place. Our O-rings are already installed, and then we can start our bolts. O-rings are in and nicely seated the way we want them. Very carefully, just work our intake into its home. So right like that. And then we'll get our bolts and get them started. One easy one on our driver's side. And get one easy one over here on our passenger side. Make sure everybody's lined up. Probably just get our front two in, and then I'm going to sneak the other ones around the back side. I don't like putting the bolts in the back while I'm trying to manipulate this, just because of the risk of them falling out. If you've done this a million times, it might be okay to do it that way. But for me, I just really get nervous when I'm putting any kind of loose bolt or washer or anything around our open ports. So we'll just sneak them around back. Shouldn't be a big deal.
So now we have our bolts started on our intake manifold for the upper, and then we're going to grab this guy from the kit, our spacer, and then this is one of our factory bolts that we saved from our lower intake. It's the one that was bolting down the lower intake on this side, and then we're going to slide it through right down there. There's that little provision, and then put our spacer underneath it, and then that will lock in our support for our upper intake. So getting all the bolts started after putting the intake in and not putting any in beforehand was pretty easy. All of them were easy except for the one back here on the rear, closest to the passenger side. So just as an example, I use one of these little picker-upper tools that holds the washer and the bolt, and this bends. So I was able to kind of just drop it in there, and then you pull this handle and you can release it. So these are very inexpensive. You can get them anywhere, and they're handy to have in your toolbox anyway. But if you don't put that rear bolt in, this is probably the easiest way to get it in there. All right, so our intake is looking very beautiful under the hood of the truck. You can see that over here we have our boss on the back for our dipstick tube. Now, if I put mine up to it, we're about maybe a hole, maybe a little more off. And that is because we're making contact right there with the other part of our factory dipstick bracket. So we are going to have to modify that and remove some material so we can get that to line up there in the back. I did torque up all my bolts, and I come from the cat world, so torquing is kind of gospel when it comes to that. And I just used my cat torque chart, and it ended up being around 10 foot-pounds for an M6. So that's what I went with. Don't quote me on it. If you find a better torque spec or whatever, go ahead with that. But some guys are just running them up with ratchets. That's fine if that's what you feel comfortable with. But for me, kind of always been on the torque wrench with most of my engine work. So that's just kind of where I go with it. So got all those torqued up. I even torqued up our bolt here in the front. So everything's nice and solid. Everything's looking very beautiful under the hood here. And looking forward to the next step. We just got to do a little cutting there to get that dipstick tube in its place, and we can move on to more of our piping. All right, so now with our wiring, because we flipped around our EGR pipe, I have all these nicely torqued up here as well, and you can look up online if you want to get a torque spec. It says like 89 inch-pounds or something like that is what I found. So we got all those tightened up. I actually reused my old gaskets because the new gaskets that they give you are bigger. They fit, but there's a whole lot of material that sits on the outside of them. And I've reused these before. I never had a leak, so I'm going to be taking that risk, and I should be fine. If they leak, no big deal. I'll just swap them out. At that time, they were very easy to get at where we have it now. But we do have this guy right here, and I've seen on other people's videos where they have a little Christmas tree type locator like this on the wire. Mine is right here on the connector. So they do leave you a little provision down there for this. And when I find that, honestly, I went through the instructions, I did not see anything about this. But what we're going to do is I'm going to take this little plastic piece here off, so then this can sit in that hole, and it's just going to sit this way, and then our wire does reach to connect to it. And then we do have some extra hanging off here, and I'll probably end up having to lightly zip tie that up to our coolant hose to keep that from touching our other pipe. But that's kind of what I figured out with this, and we'll see how it all looks when it's put back together. All right, so now that our throttle valve has its new gasket supplied in the kit, we've just got 2 bolts here, and we've cleaned our throttle valve up because there's a bunch of soot and everything else from our EGR system in there. Grab our other 2 bolts, and we get that thing tightened up. All right, so now for our cold side, that's going to be going into our throttle valve. We do have this right here, which is a bracket that's going to allow us to get our factory sensor from our old tube, which is right here. I've had to do a little bit of learning here with a couple of things. These, you just turn them, pull it out. And that is our factory one, can go over there, plastic and rubber. Now we're going to this unit right here. So if you're wondering, it just goes like this, slides over and then locks onto that tab. And we'll just get it down in here, push everything down, everything aligned. And you just line this little bracket up with your IET sensor, and then we tighten it down with a 3mm Allen. You're nicely sucked down, and nothing is moving anywhere there, so now we are good to go. Now we can get our 90° onto our intercooler on the bottom side and get ready to put this pipe in. All right, so our cold side pipe is in loosely. We got our elbow down there, 90° comes up, and then what you want to do is spray a bunch of silicone spray into this section here, because it has to go really far down, almost all the way to where the bend happens, in order to have enough room to get everything on the throttle valve. And we don't have it engaged just yet. I just want to make sure that everything is where I want it, and we have our right angles and everything has nice clearance before we snap this guy into place. But we did retain our factory piece here. Our little clip goes onto the supplied piece from Pusher. And then I didn't actually use any silicone spray in between this and this, just so when I tighten this clamp, it's not gonna want to try to walk off on me. Make sure your O-ring is in there. So what we're gonna do now is tighten up that clamp on the intercooler and then align everything, and then we can start tightening up clamps and get this thing snapped into our throttle valve. All right, so our cold side pipe is in place. All our clamps are tight, and you just wanna put your positioning of your clamps wherever you see fit, that they're not gonna be in the way of anything or any rub points, all of that. Make sure your clamps are straight when you tighten them down. This one is a little tricky because sometimes the pipe wants to move and then it doesn't wanna allow this clip to engage. So you wanna have a nice solid click when that little adapter goes into our throttle valve, which we did have. One thing I did find out was this clamp right here with these little edges here. If you're messing around with that elbow, sometimes your pipe, when you're putting it in, can contact these sharp edges. And you can mess up your powder coat a little bit, so be careful of that. Maybe turn that clamp or put something over it, or just be really aware of it, because I did get a tiny little mark on mine, but a little touch-up paint and you can't even see it. But that's just one of those things that when you're putting something like this in your truck, it costs a lot of money, you want it to look nice. So yeah, I'll learn the hard way. You guys can skip the pain and crying about anything that might have happened to yours. So now what we're gonna end up doing is we're gonna get our fuel bowl back in, and then we can put our fleece upper on, and then we'll be ready to go ahead and do our cutting of this little bracket right here on our dipstick. So then we can get our dipstick fastened in the back there, and then we can do our hot side pipe, and we're pretty well complete here. So anybody who's wondering what cutting the dipstick bracket looks like, this is what I did right here. We were about halfway through right now. Just needed a vibration break, but we have our moving blanket. I have all the fuel lines with gloves over top, so it doesn't matter, they're covered anyways by the blanket, but just for added security. And obviously our upper port on our turbo is covered with a glove as well, and everything else is sealed up. So just make sure that you don't drop things where they shouldn't go, and it shouldn't be too terrible. Just take your time, make sure you make a nice cut, and obviously we're gonna put a little bit of paint over it to make sure it doesn't rust, and we shouldn't notice it really when it's put back together. So this is the piece that I cut off of that front bracket, just so we can actually get the dipstick tube far enough over to the new intake that we can get that rear bolt installed, and it should give us room for our fuel filter adapter and all that, hopefully. So this is our first cut. Hopefully it's our last one, but we'll have to mock it all up and see if there's anything more we need to do with it. So this is what it looks like after it's cut and fastened in the back there using the factory bolt. I did just kind of grab it and then pull it a little bit just to give it a little bit of a tweak, just so it wasn't super close to our intake. It was still
fairly close, but not too bad. I mean, any kind of vibration, that's not going to touch now, and the dipstick works as it should. And I mean, you guys can cut off as much of this as you want to. I was just worried I was going to cut into our dipstick tube or make a mess out of it. So now when you look under the hood, you don't really see anything out of the ordinary, which is how I wanted it to be. So now our cup is back in place, just hoping that we have enough room for our new adapter from Fleece. We've got this guy right here where we put our new Donaldson filter in. So this is kind of just a look at what we're dealing with. This is gonna sit up there and lock in just like the factory one will in that cup. So you just kind of turn it, clock it, it'll lock into place. But now down below, we've got a Donaldson filter. They should give us a second one, which is really nice. So we have our part number right there as well. So next time we got to change them, we have one, and we can order some spares, but it's going to sit down in our cup like that, and we're not going to have that factory problem where that little circle on the top on this guy, when these filters, people forget about them, they plug up and then they start spraying fuel out of there, and then you got big problems. So we're going to avoid that. It's actually our first fuel filter change on this truck. Mind you, if you are changing this out, you are going to have to bleed your fuel system as well. Usually you do about 12 or so, 10, 12 just cycles of our pump and make sure that we got all the air out of it. But we're going to be doing the bottom one as well at some point. But for now, we're just going to get this all put together because we have our fuel filter out. We might as well put this in at the same time. So this is going to go in, and fingers crossed, we're not going to have any more cutting to do on our dipstick tube. So there you can see the Fleece system with our dipstick, with how much of that bracket we did leave on it. We have room all the way around. No big deal at all. Everybody has room to vibrate and live under the hood without rubbing or anything like that. All my lines are back on. I want to make sure you pop those caps off. Obviously, you're not going to be able to get your lines on if you leave those on. So I would actually probably put those aside. And if you want to change your fuel filter, when you pop these lines off, you can keep those little rubber ends, put them on there. And then when you're pulling this guy out, it's not going to be leaking fuel all over the place. Just kind of something I thought about. But we're going to be putting those aside, and everything was looking very nice under here right now. And next thing we got to do is our hot side. Get that put in. We put our vacuum line back together and reconnect our stuff back here for our sensors. Get everything really buttoned up under here, and we're almost ready to test. So now for our hot side, we have our pusher coupler right there, the straight one, and we have our clamps already on there, some silicone spray slipped right onto our intercooler. And now I've seen other videos where they have a different style. That's why I was a little confused. This is the newest style, I would imagine. It comes with this O-ring that goes right inside there, and then your factory clip. And to remove the factory clip, you're gonna have to pop off the little plastic retainers on your original part, which is no big deal, a little flat blade screwdriver. They pop right out, and then you can get this guy on there. So I have it so it should be to the top, and we should be able to get this guy to click into our turbo. So then we'll slip over that end, or I'll slip this end in there, and then we'll line it up and kind of see how this all works out. So on our hot side, I ended up using a ton of silicone spray, sprayed it on our coupler and on our tube itself. And then we have our clip and our O-ring installed on the end of it, which comes with the kit. So make sure you have your O-ring in there. And then what I did was I lined this up, had enough room here to slide this coupler back over our intercooler. So it actually slid over pretty easily. So lots of silicone spray, works really, really well. And then while you're pulling on this, you can really make sure that this is engaged. You can hear that clip is holding in place, and everything should be nicely clicked in the way it should be. I didn't get a super loud click like I did with this one. Just keep that in mind, but there's no other way that is holding on the way that it is without that clip being engaged. You can see that it's not popped up anywhere or anything like that, so we should be good to go. But yes, looking awesome under the hood here with our brand new piping kit. And it's got to tighten down these clamps over here, make sure everything's where I want it. And then we can go through, button up the rest of this, and prime our fuel system. So we pretty much got everything buttoned up here. Everything's together, clamps are all tight, everything's where we want it to be. I have our back pressure sensor right here hooked back up. Our map sensor is back hooked up over here. And there is this one little black piece right like that goes onto the stud for our factory location, and I think I'm going to very carefully cut off this little zip tie that holds that on, just so it's not there anymore, because it's not needed anymore either. And the wiring just kind of sits back here. From what I can see, I don't see that really being a problem. But over here, this is where my problem lies. We do have it sitting up on top of this little provision from our banks, and everything's kind of out of the way. But if this were to move at all, like say it just kind of moved forward off of that, this would be touching right here, which I do not like. And we do have this guy underneath, which would go into our factory intake. So my plan is move this guy back here. This is where it's gonna live. And we also have this wire here, which potentially could touch the hot pipe right here. So I'm thinking this is a mounting point right here, and I can probably just drill a hole in a piece of flat bar, give it a little angle twist, and have it come over to this, just to kind of keep this nice and straight, because there is a bend right here. And if this, it's a molded hose, so it shouldn't pinch off, but I just really don't want to put strain on that part of the cooling system. I know there's reroutes and everything. I haven't really looked into them too much, but I think just for how easy it would be just to make a little bracket that's going to come over, hold this up, and then I can zip tie this to here. That's going to keep everything out of the way for me. And you guys can do what you want, but I just want to kind of make this as nice as possible for my truck. So this is where we're at with our bracket. You can see I just have it loosely on this factory mounting bolt for our EGR. And I imagine if you don't have an EGR, this isn't going to work, because you're not going to have that pipe there any longer from what I know. But for us today, this is going to work. And you can see down in there where I'm going to put our plastic clip. I just need to drill our hole, and this is the bend I had to make. I did a twist here on the end, and then I did a little slight down turn here just to make this sit exactly where it would want to do from the factory. And we're not going to have any flow restrictions or anything getting burnt on any of the piping or anything like that. You hear a little gurgling going on. We're just doing our priming of the fuel system. We'll have to do it again when we do our lower filter. But for now, obviously, just want to get this thing operational once again. It's the second time I've done it. We're just turning it to accessory mode. You can hear that gurgling going on. And at the same time, we're just checking for leaks, making sure we got everything connected properly, and you can hear that fuel cycling through our new Donaldson filter. Here it stop. We still got gurgling going on. We're gonna do this. I mean, I'm probably gonna do it about 10 times, at least 10 times, making sure I don't hear any more gurgling happening. And then we got all the air out of our system. You hear all the air coming back out of there. Definitely gonna take a few tries to get all that pushed through. So now we've done 12 cycles of the key, and even throughout the 9, 10 cycles, I did hear some bubbles. So we'll fire this thing up and see what we got. Oh yeah! There it is. Our beautiful fleece adapter for our upper fuel filter, and our pusher intakes and hot and cold side pipes going to our banks, ram air. Still running our disaster prevention kit from S&S. Looking really nice under here. Can't wait to hear how it is on the road. So this is what my bracket ended up looking like. I was gonna paint it black, but actually in the white primer, it kind of matches everything. So I figured what's the harm in trying it like that? And if we have to repaint it, it's one bolt to remove it. Pretty simple stuff. Now you can see everything is gonna sit where I want it. This sits where this provision is, and this isn't gonna move or flop around anywhere like it was before. And also with our EGT probe right there, I was thinking about tying it up to the bracket, but if I tie it up really close here, it really isn't doing anything because it's really close to where the probe itself is. And it does have that silicone coating on the wiring, and as it loops around and goes down there, it's really kind of by itself in the middle and in a nice position. So I think just leaving it the way it is gonna work just fine. So there it is, everybody, our installation of our pusher intake along with our hot and cold side. And we even did our fleece upper fuel filter on this episode just because, well, we were in there anyway. And some of the modifications that I did, including building that bracket, including cutting that dipstick tube, which you have to do, especially on the 22 from my experience. But that's just kind of things I ran into. Hopefully it was helpful that you guys can follow along with exactly my journey on this installation. And stay tuned for the next episode because I would be taking you guys for a drive this episode, but it's pouring rain. It's going to for the next week, and I really want to get this video out. And the truck is clean, and there's calcium chloride all over the road. So I don't want to do that. So when it's nice and dry and sunny out, we're going to go for a nice little rip in the truck. And we do have a bunch of other awesome things coming for this build. So it's going to get a little bit more intense on this truck, and I'm very excited for that. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. And as always, keep that hammer down.